Vladimir Putin has a long list of problems. His war in Ukraine has lasted far longer than he ever expected. Most of the West has aligned against him, and bluntly, time is not on his side. He's aging, and he may be gone long before Ukraine is ever forced into the outcome he wants. But one problem he did not anticipate becoming this serious is France. And yet, without firing a single shot, France has managed to hit Russia where it hurts, so fast that it feels like Putin woke up to a new battlefield overnight. Actually, problem might be too small a word, because France has now landed two separate blows in recent days. And the second one matters even more, because it helps Ukraine do something it badly needs to do. So let's break this down carefully, step by step. France's first hit, the Shadow Fleet, just got less invisible. The first strike is direct, practical, and symbolic all at once. France has seized a shadow tanker, one of the vessels Russia relies on to quietly move oil around the world while dodging sanctions. On January 22nd, BBC News reported that France seized a suspected Russian Shadow Fleet tanker in the Mediterranean. The ship's name was the Grinch, and no, this isn't a Hollywood joke or a Jim Carrey reference. It's a real vessel, and it became a target for one reason. France says it was operating under international sanctions and was suspected of flying a false flag, according to French President Emmanuel Macron. You can imagine what that moment felt like on board. 1 minute, the crew thinks they're just another ship moving through another stretch of sea. The next minute, the French Navy shows up, and the whole operation collapses into panic and procedure. After boarding the vessel, the French Navy carried out a detailed search. And that search led French maritime authorities to conclude that the Navy had confirmed doubts about the legality of the ship's flag. That phrase is diplomatic language for something much simpler. Russia's ship wasn't truly flying the flag it claimed. It was using another nation's flag, one of the classic Shadow Fleet methods used to blur ownership, reduce scrutiny, and slip through the cracks. Soon after the seizure, Macron posted about it publicly on X, and the tone made it feel like the message was aimed straight at Moscow. He said France would not tolerate violations, and he laid out what France had done. He explained the operation was conducted in the Mediterranean on the high seas, with support from several allies, and that it complied with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. He also noted a judicial investigation had been opened and that the ship had been diverted. That line about allies is not just decoration, it's a clue, because France didn't do this alone. The quiet partner. How the UK helped set the trap. France had help from a key ally, the United Kingdom. According to the UK outlet LBC, a Royal Navy patrol ship had been tracking the shadow tanker long before France moved in. LBC reports that UK Defence Secretary John Healey said Britain provided tracking support while the Grinch passed through the Strait of Gibraltar. And that makes perfect operational sense. The Strait of Gibraltar is a narrow and strategically vital waterway between the southern tip of Spain and the northern edge of Africa. It's one of the cleanest, most important maritime gates between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. And the UK crucially maintains a base on the small rocky territory that shares the name Gibraltar. That presence matters because it gives Britain eyes, access, and surveillance advantages in the region. LBC says the UK deployed HMS Dagger, likely operating from that base, to track the ship as it entered the Mediterranean. And what flag was the Grinch flying? The Comoros flag, an East African nation so obscure that many people couldn't locate it quickly on a map. That's exactly why shadow fleets love flags like this. Low scrutiny, low visibility, high confusion. But this time, the route didn't lead to safety. The Grinch continued into the Mediterranean, right into the moment where France seized it. Why the Grinch was a clear target. The Grinch wasn't just suspicious, it was already sanctioned by the UK, by the European Union, and by the United States. Those entities all accused it of being part of the shadow fleet that keeps oil money flowing into Russia despite sanctions. LBC adds that investigations later suggested the ship had traveled from Russia's Murmansk region, but its final destination remains unclear because it was intercepted in waters between Spain and Morocco. And this isn't happening in isolation. This is now the second time the UK has been involved in shadow fleet tanker seizures in recent weeks. Earlier in January, the United States targeted two ships, one in the Caribbean and another in the North Atlantic, suspected of moving oil between Russia and Venezuela. One of those ships, now called Marinera, previously known as Bella 1, led U.S. forces on a chase across hundreds of miles after an initial attempt to seize it. Eventually, the U.S. caught up to it between Scotland and Iceland, where it was found sailing under the flag of Guyana, and again the UK played a supporting role. Sky News reports that Britain provided enabling support, including access to bases, and made the RFA Tide Force available, normally a refueling vessel, to help the Americans. Support also included at least one Royal Air Force aircraft providing aerial surveillance to keep the pursuit accurate and continuous. So yes, the UK has been busy, But in those earlier cases, Britain supported. On January 22nd, France took the headline role, and Russia felt it. Why this hurts Putin? The shadow fleet is a lifeline. Putin losing another tanker is the last thing he wants because these old, semi-hidden vessels are part of a lifeline. They keep cash flowing into Russia when Russia needs it most. Russia built its shadow fleet specifically to get around Western sanctions imposed after the invasion. The Guardian describes the shadow fleet as hundreds of older, unregulated tankers bought from across the globe. Many would fail inspections if they faced real oversight, but instead they sail in gray zones, carrying Russian oil to buyers willing to purchase it at discounted prices, including countries like India, China, Venezuela, and others. And the fleet is massive. The Guardian cites figures from Lloyd's List Intelligence estimating that Russia's shadow fleet includes 1,423 tankers, with 921 sanctioned by at least one of the UK, EU, or US. Even those numbers may not be complete. A secret fleet is designed to be difficult to count. Now, on pure math alone, one tanker seized doesn't cripple a fleet of over 1,000. The tanker that's seized won't sail again, but another can replace it. And there's a reason Russia could afford this. Putin has spent huge money assembling the fleet, reported at $14 billion as of May 2025, per Ukrainian shipping magazine. So why does the Grinch matter? Because the seizure isn't just a loss of one ship, it's a message. The real damage, scrutiny creates risk. The real impact of seizing the Grinch is the signal it sends. France is watching, and France isn't alone. The UK and US have both moved in recent weeks to curtail shadow fleet activity. A fleet that once sailed with near impunity is now under heavier scrutiny than ever, and scrutiny changes everything. Scrutiny creates risk, and risk changes behavior. Putin still has to send ships out. He has to make deliveries. He has to pick up cargo. Oil remains one of Russia's most important sources of money, even when it's discounted. And Russia needs money, badly. Between its high budget deficit, limited access to international credit, and blocked foreign reserves, Russia needs every revenue stream it can get, and oil is one of the biggest. But now, every shadow fleet ship leaving Russian waters has a shadow over it too. It could be intercepted, it could be seized, it could be exposed, especially if it sails into areas where European or American forces can act. And here's the simple point. France seized one ship today. Tomorrow, France, and possibly its allies, could ramp this into a larger campaign against the fleet. If that happens, Putin's options are limited, because the shadow fleet exists through denial. Russia can't always admit ownership without exposing the very deception it relies on. And legally, Europe is not helpless here. As the European Policy Center points out, Europe has legal standing to increase seizures. Between the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, allowing disruption of unsafe shipping, and MARPOL and SOLAS regulations, allowing detention for safety failures, Russia would struggle to challenge seizures even if it tried to reclaim ships. So that's strike one. But now we get to strike two. And this is the one that changes the strategic map. France's second hit. Intelligence, not just ships. Seizing a shadow tanker is big news, especially for Ukraine, because the war is also a contest of endurance. Whoever can outlast the other financially and militarily gains leverage. But the bigger revelation is this. France has now surpassed the United States as the largest provider of military intelligence to Ukraine. On January 16th, Business Insider reported that Macron effectively put Russia on notice by revealing that France now provides 2/3 of the intelligence Ukraine uses in the war. Macron disclosed this in his New Year's speech to the French military, saying that while Ukraine was overwhelmingly dependent on American intelligence capacity a year ago, 2/3 is today provided by France. That is an enormous shift, and it matters for one core reason. It helps Ukraine decouple itself from the United States at the exact moment U.S. support has become harder to predict. Business Insider frames this as part of France's push to become a regional military leader in Europe, especially as the Trump administration pushes Europe to take more responsibility for its own defense. And the Kyiv Independent explains why intelligence, regardless of source, is vital. Every scrap of information helps, but the most important form is high-quality, recent satellite imagery. It can reveal troop positions, air defense sites, stockpiles, logistics nodes, targets Ukraine can strike with missiles and long-range drones. Think of satellite intelligence as the overhead layer that complements drone reconnaissance. Drones scan locally and frequently. Satellites scan broadly and strategically. We don't know every detail about what France provides, but we have strong clues. The clues, Le Cornu, sovereign intelligence, and satellites. One clue comes from French Armed Forces Minister Sébastien Lecornu. Back in March 2025, Lecornu said on France Inter Radio that France was sharing intelligence with Ukraine, sovereign intelligence, built on France's own capabilities. He said France was already sharing it. He didn't give details, but the phrase sovereign intelligence strongly suggests France is relying on its own systems rather than borrowing from others. and that has led Militarny to conclude that France is likely feeding Ukraine imagery from its Composante Spatiale Optique constellation, known as CSO. CSO's full deployment was completed in 2025, and one detail stands out. The third and final satellite was transported to its launch site by a Ukrainian An-124 aircraft, suggesting cooperation long before public confirmation. Militarny describes the satellites as sharing an identical design, using optical systems based on the Korsh telescope configuration, mirrors made from ultra-stable zero-Dur glass ceramic with near-zero thermal expansion, and infrared imaging capability. Each also has multiple telescopes capable of photographing the same target from multiple angles, useful for 3D terrain modeling, which is especially valuable for targeting and operational planning. How the CSO system works and why it matters. The CSO system is structured in a way that's smart for intelligence gathering because each satellite has a role. CSO-1 operates at about 800 kilometer altitude and provides wide area reconnaissance at up to 35 centimeter resolution, clear enough to identify armored vehicles and aircraft positions. CSO-2 flies lower at about 480 kilometer, producing images at 18 centimeter resolution, sharp enough to distinguish not just a tank, but the specific type, and even detect decoys. The drawback is that this orbit layer has atmospheric traces, reducing lifespan. CSO-2 launched in 2020 and is expected to last roughly 10 years, with replacement likely around 2030. CSO-3 is similar to CSO-1 in orbit and clarity, but serves a different mission. It boosts revisit rate, meaning it refreshes images more frequently. With CSO-1 and CSO-3 operating at the same altitude but different orbital phases, one can image an area, then the other passes hours later to refresh. The result is Ukraine can receive imagery that's potentially no more than around 12 hours old, based on standard orbit cycles. And that's not all. Commercial imagery and signals, Pleiades and Ceres. Ukraine may also be benefiting from commercial imagery from Pleiades and Pleiades Neo, launched between 2011 and 2021 by Airbus Defence and Space. Ukraine has contributed to this ecosystem too. Pleiades Neo 3 and 4 launched on Vega rockets using Ukrainian RD-843 engines built in Dnipro. Pleiades Neo satellites can reach 30 centimeter resolution and capture 14-kilometer swathes. Pleiades 1A and 1B capture wider territory, up to 20 kilometer, at 50 centimeter resolution. Then there's Ceres, a constellation of 3 satellites operating around 700 kilometer altitude in triangular formation, designed to locate and triangulate radio emissions on Earth. That means if Ukraine needs to identify sources of signals, these satellites can help. But there are gaps. France does not appear to provide early warning for ballistic missile launches, and Europe generally lacks strong early warning capability in this category. France also doesn't operate radar satellites, though it can receive radar imagery from partners like Italy and Germany, either to pass along to Ukraine or as part of the intelligence supply that makes up the remaining one-third not covered by France. That's a lot of technical detail, but it matters because now we return to the central strategic reason this is so important. The U.S. problem: Ukraine can't be certain. Washington will always share Ukraine, can never be fully certain. The Trump administration will provide what it needs when it needs it. If 2025 taught anything, it's that the relationship can shift rapidly, often influenced by the state of peace talks. On March 5, 2025, U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz confirmed that America paused intelligence sharing after a disastrous White House meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Access was restored quickly, but the Kyiv Independent notes that Trump also threatened to cut support again if Ukraine refused a peace plan that would have forced it to cede key territory. Even now, it's unclear exactly how much intelligence the U.S. shares compared to what it shared under the Biden administration. Ukraine still receives some. But whether the level matches past support is debated. In that environment, France becomes more than a partner. France becomes a stabilizer. And for Putin, that is dangerous. He may believe he can pressure or manipulate Trump in ways he cannot with Macron. And while France has limitations, Ukraine will still want the U.S. involved if possible. But with 2/3 of intelligence now reportedly coming from France, Ukraine is no longer completely vulnerable to being cut off. That alone changes the balance. It means Ukraine can continue operating, even if Washington becomes unpredictable. There are even hints, though impossible to confirm fully, that Ukraine may have used French intelligence during a rapid 48-hour series of strikes that targeted air defense systems and radar nodes over occupied territory. And whether or not that specific sequence used French intelligence, the broader reality remains. France is now positioned as a central intelligence pillar supporting Ukraine. 2 blows, 1 message. So when you step back, you see the shape of what France has done. First, France has shown it can disrupt Russia's shadow oil lifeline, not just by seizing a ship, but by demonstrating that the fleet is being watched and tracked, and that seizures can happen again. Second, France has reportedly become the dominant intelligence provider for Ukraine, reducing Kiev's dependence on the United States at a time when the U.S. relationship has proven volatile. One move pressures Russia's money. The other strengthens Ukraine's ability to fight. And together, they form a message Putin cannot ignore. France isn't just watching the war. France is shaping the conditions around it. If you want, I can also turn this into a scene-by-scene 15-minute voiceover script with natural pauses, emphasis cues, and B-roll prompts, while keeping every line and fact intact.